The Newbery Medal isn't about my book, or any book. It's about the invisible fellowship of librarians, publishers, parents, teachers, and writers who want to give their best to children. The Newbery Medal is a symbol of our communion. We are threaded together by our commitment to children and the life of the mind. We dance together on one string. And now it is time to say thank you, and to try to say it simply, purely, as Tessa did. Thank you for coming here tonight, for being readers, for knowing that children and books matter. Thank you, my parents, for opening the world of books to me. Thank you, my friends from the Park School, for helping me write and for helping me rejoice. Thank you, Robert Bird, for your irresistible artwork, and thank you, Chris Paul, for your stunning sense of design. Thank you, goddesses of the Candlewick Pantheon, but especially Danielle Sadler, who dredged this manuscript out of the slush pile, and Mary Lee Donovan, whose faith and compassion are heroic. And last of all, thank you, members of the Newbery Committee, for feeding my bears and granting me my heart's desire.
Now one day, he looked out and he saw an old woman coming up the track near his cottage, and he thought maybe she'd come to buy a jar of honey. So he went out to the gate to meet her, and the hare went with him.
But one specific thing I remember is I was coming back from tutor. And I hated going to tutor, particularly because I had to miss library, which was like the worst punishment in the entire world. Not only did I have to do extra math, I had to miss library class with Laura. And I'd gotten in a fight with her over something, the tutor. And I came back, and I remember Laura just putting her arm around me and sort of walking me down by a shelf of books and repeating bits of the story she told the class. And she was always just the most warm and loving person and was so kind to everyone. It was unbelievable.
I remember we were studying Native American history and literature in 3rd grade, and we did this one activity where we had to find our spirit animals. So we just kind of went out to this bridge, and the bridge separating the campus from the woods, and we all sat on the bridge, and she did this meditation exercise, and it was just really tranquil and calming, and her voice just sort of soothes and relaxes, and it's a very, I don't know, it'd be interesting to have her read a story to the upper schoolers, because I think we've all forgotten almost what it's like, but I don't know, it's nice. It's a very calming experience.
So when did you start writing stories?
I remember writing a poem, or asking my mother to write down a poem I'd thought of. I started writing stories pretty early. By 5th grade, I was taking little packets of paper out on the playground at recess. I know I did some writing in 4th grade, and I guess probably around 3rd.
Do you remember what you were reading then, and was that sort of?
Yeah, of course I copied what I read.
That's all I ever.
Yeah,
I did that
and of
for
course,
a very long time.
my childhood poetry, a lot of it is quite didactic because that's what I was reading.
Of course.
So I would write these little moral poems about,
the way to behave.
Yeah.
What a good girl does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my parents were just about perfect because when I showed them something I'd written, they were pretty much thrilled with it. They loved it. And then they sort of forgot about it.
Oh, that seems right.
And I sometimes...
They didn't frame it and put it up and
No.
erect a shrine.
Or, talk about revising it or deciding that I was so special that I had to take a course and, or that I needed to be published. They just, they were thrilled with it, and
and then we went on with our lives. Although I do remember with some amusement going to my parents once. It was the first time I'd finished something, and I think I was around 4th grade, and it was this story about this black pig that was shipwrecked on a desert island with an impertinent goat. You know, who of course kind of loosened her up. You know, 'cause she's not a very nice pig. But they had to depend on each other to survive. You know, I finally finished something, you know, and it had illustrations because I could put the stuffed animals on the page and draw around them. So they were better pictures than I could have drawn freehand. And I wanted to read it to my parents, and they were busy.
Oh.
You know, and I just came into my room and threw a fit and wept, you know, and went back to them and stormed and said I had worked on these characters, I had molded them like statues. You know, I remember saying
An impertinent goat.
That I had shaped them like statues, and you know, they were contrite, and they came, you know, not right away because they didn't want to finish watching it, but you know, when they came in, it was like, okay, now, you know, we now we're ready to hear, and they like the story.
When I think of you, I think of some of the great writers that I love, among whom are the Brontes. And I think about the Brontes and the Gondal sort of stuff.
That's very nice, yes.
That they did. So, you know, that sense of, at a very young age, that family, those girls with this sort of really fully realized imaginative world, right? Anything like that for you? I mean, what were the...
Yeah, my brother and I we ruled over 2 kingdoms of stuffed animals.
Is that true?
Yeah. His
How did that go?
Well, he was the great Paul. I was the great Laurie. He ruled over North Side, I ruled over South Side.
Were there any ever conflicts or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Though he was much more interested in playing war than I was, because I was never that interested in war, because it was boring.
Did you have narrative going on in a way that he did?
Yeah, and we had a national anthem.
Can you sing it now?
Oh, it's the Grand March from Aida.
Oh.
When I was a child, I thought that was the best piece of music ever. So that was the Grand March. His was the Marine hymn. And you know, we had all these animals. We had a lot of animals, and there were different animals who were mayor. I have somewhere in my possession a letter from Timothy Turtle about the Social Security situation, which he says is utterly, UDDERLY, disgraceful.
Wait, was he aware of his own cleverness with utterly?
No. I just couldn't spell, but he thought the Social Security situation was
utterly disgraceful.
Utterly disgraceful, you know, and...
Can we get a copy of that?
I don't know where it is. I've got it somewhere, but it's also kind of funny for me to look back at, because, you know, he says, for some time now I have thought that the Social Security situation in Animal Town is utterly disgraceful. And then Lenny says something like, and the plan for old people is also not so hot. And I realize I still do that. I still say something really formal.
Then the ironic deflation.
And then
you
slip
do
into
that.
slang. And it's something that I was doing in 4th grade.
Oh, that's so funny.
When I wrote, you know, this letter. But yeah, we had all these animals, and you know, Jumbo Jim, who actually is still upstairs sleeping on my bed,
I'll be darned.
was kind of the king. My brother and I were not kings. You know, Jumbo Jim was the king, and there were mayors. We were gods. We were gods, and they would pray to the great Paul and the great Laurie.
And why shouldn't
you know, and sometimes we interfered with their affairs in benevolent ways.
So, everybody I talk to at Park has a really interesting sort of story about how they got there. How did you come to Park?
I came to Park doing children's theater. You know, I was with Children's Theater Association. We went from school to school to school, and we were doing The Secret Garden with Cornelia Cody. And I got to Park, and we got laughs that we never had before. The visual humor, not always got laughs, but we got the verbal humor.
The verbal humor got laughs. And I looked at the wonderful artwork in the hall. And I looked at the bathrooms. Because whenever we went to lots of schools where the bathrooms were filthy and there was no hot water and there were no paper towels and children were clearly being treated like animals. And I looked at this artwork and I looked at the kids and I thought I'd like to work here. Oscar Wilde, when I was in high school, which I deeply loathed, I came across Oscar Wilde and I read a lot of Oscar Wilde, and one of the things he said was that schools should be so beautiful, such wonderful places that the worst thing a child could imagine would be to not be able to go to school. And that was always, I would have loved Park.
You know, Parkman Sharpless actually, believe it or not, said something very much like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he thought the same way. A parent once came to him and talked about how concerned he was because his child seemed to like school every day, and that seemed sort of strange to him. And Parkman said, "It actually seems to me like a wonderful set of circumstances."
Yeah.
So how did Park then call you, or did you call Park?
I kept an eye out for jobs in admissions because I didn't have a teaching degree or anything like that. And I applied for admissions, and I was very lucky not to have been hired. Because, with admissions, I'd have to maintain a certain dignity. I wouldn't be able to sit on the floor. And whereas I find it quite possible to be extremely honest with Park students.
And undignified.
Yes, very undignified. So I sort of, and then there was an opening for a librarian. The school year had already begun, and
What year was this?
I think it was 91.
Uh-huh.
Been there 20 years now. Last year was my 20th.
Wow.
So, so I came and...
Did you have a degree in
No, all I have is a Bachelor of Arts in Aesthetics.
So is this a case of Parvin or somebody recognizing and saying, this is exactly the right person?
I don't know exactly how it happened.
Huh.
In a way, it was kind of miraculous.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah, I wanted to work there. I really needed a job. And there it was.
Who was in charge of the library then?
Susan Weintraub.
Was it Susan?
Yeah, she'd just come. And of course I'd worked with John Romer had been my Sunday school teacher.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was an in.
Yeah. And I had been a children's librarian at Pratt Free Library for 8 years, and then I'd worked for Baltimore County, so I did know library work.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, librarians, they have to, the media specialists, all that nonsense.
Right. Had you, at that point when you came to Park, what had you been writing? Were you writing plays mainly then?
Yeah, I'd written plays. I'd written a Regency romance, but mostly plays. I didn't learn to finish anything until I was in my late 20s. I just wrote beginnings all the time, beginnings. I just couldn't finish anything.
Huh.
And that's something that I always tell young writers, because my inability to finish anything made me feel like I'd never really be a writer.
Huh.
But I was teaching myself to write.
Yeah.
I was teaching myself to write. And of course, middles are hell. If you can get the middle right,
I know.
The ending will take care of itself, but the middle is just a swamp. And of course, I've never gotten through the middle of Splendors without you.
Well, he'll have to edit myself, but that's very nice of you to say.
It's true.
What was the first thing you finished that you feel you finished in your 20s, I guess?
I guess the plays. I finished the plays,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Regency.
Mm-hmm. So you've won some awards, and you won the Newbery Award.
I won the Newbery Award.
So
It's going to be on my tombstone.
So what was that like?
Well, I happen to have the award here.
Would you show?
Yeah. I actually first, at the Newbery banquet, which is like 1,200 people, they give you this, and you give your speech, and I gave my speech. And then afterwards there's a receiving line, but between the receiving line and the speeches, they give you 3 minutes to go to the bathroom. So I first opened this in the bathroom. And I was so pleased it had all these layers.
That's nice. It ought to be nice.
You know, and it's not fair because the people who win the honors, they get plaques. I think if I'm ever really rich, I'm going to make sure they get a medal too, because, you know, the honor is really just as good in some ways, and they should have a medal.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But anyway, that's my medal.
May I hold that in my
Yeah,
hand?
for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. That has my name on it.
Is the camera there? That is so beautiful. It has a nice heft to it too.
Yeah, it does.
No, it does. It should. For the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. Very nice. So, are you looking forward to winning any more Newbery
Lightning
Awards?
does not strike twice. This was amazing. This was, you know, it was an astonishment.
Did it change things for you?
Yes.
How?
Oh, that's such a hard question.
Well, did it change? I mean, did it change things both externally and internally?
It changed things a lot externally. I mean, and the first year was, you know, sort of a wonderful crisis of interviews and
Yeah, that was a whirlwind, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, suddenly people, like organizations you'd never even known existed, you know, some cheese tasting people in Annapolis wanted me to come and speak, you know, for free, of course. But I mean, you know, just all kinds.
As a lover of cheese.
Yeah, I don't know what cheese has to do with children's literature, but maybe that's, you know, maybe that's really obtuse of me not to make that connection. And there were some glorious moments of, you know, for years I had been unable to get an agent. And, you know, once I won this award, I could, I mean, agents wanted to meet me. You know, they would say, "Oh, come to you." That was a thrill. Internally, I guess internally the dust hasn't quite settled yet.
Well, look, I know what the sort of standard response is. Say, well, awards are neither here nor there, but it seems to me that it must feel a little bit like a validation from
It
your
is.
peers?
It is. It's a huge validation, and it's you know, that sort of question of am I any good shifts to am I good enough, and
am I any good? Switches to am I good enough? There's whatever. I'm sure that there are just further incarnations of that.
yeah.
Can you ask her about what it felt like when Park gave the kind of "we're proud of you" assembly?
Well, let me see if I can think of a way. I mean, that seems like that would be a little closed because it seems like that's sort of like you're expecting a certain answer. So how about if I ask something more generally about Park? Is that all right? Okay. So what has the response been at Park's school? Sort of I mean, you're in an interesting situation where you're sort of in this Park School world, and we know you in a certain way, and you're also out in the world, you know, in the world of letters in a different way. So, what's the response at Park been like to your success with the award and with the books coming out? I mean, do kids know?
Oh yeah, they know. And I mean, the day that I won was amazing. You know, and I was so grateful to Park students that year for a couple reasons. I mean, it was pretty overwhelming to come into the gymnasium, and
Oh God, I do remember that day.
yeah, and I mean, I didn't even want to do that at first. I was, you know, so happily freaked out and felt like and I remember Michael Eames saying, you know, you will do this because this is also the school's day to celebrate.
Michael Eames.
And he was great. He was wonderful. And then, you know, to walk in and I think it was the paper chains that got to me. I mean, the first graders had made paper chains, and they started wrapping me in paper chains.
Oh.
And that was, and then, you know, just to see, they were all really happy for me and on my side.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, and kids made me cards. And there were 3 little girls in first grade who made a Newbery medal that's about this big.
Oh, do you still have it?
I do have it, but it's folded up in one of these big books,
Huh.
and I'm not sure which one. But and they colored it in with gold magic marker. You know, for first graders, like coloring so that the whole thing is gold, and I mean, it was
It's a
amazing
big deal.
what they had done. And then what I also appreciated was that after about a week, they'd sort of forgotten about it.
Oh,
And
like
it
your
became,
parents.
And it became the place where, you know, that being with them was the place where it wasn't weird because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they wanted me to find them their book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling stories, as I have always told stories, and what is between me and them was genuine and is genuine and did not change.
Yeah, they could be both really happy for you
Yeah, and then,
and still be exactly who they were.
yeah.
That's nice. So, I guess final question for me, and then we'll see if Josh has any more. So, how do the two, there are more than two, but how do those two parts of your life, sort of librarian at Park School and writer, I mean, how do those two fit? Do they fit together?
They fit together well, partly because the school has been, you know, amazing, really. I mean, the school staked me by letting me have the FACUS, and has been unbelievably kind to me as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I do need the children. I need to see them, and
I wonder about
and of
that.
course I have used them as little
Audiences?
guinea pigs for everything from jacket copy to book jackets. I mean, I'm always saying, well, what do you think about this? And they tell me. The Night Fairy. What I didn't know is when I read them, The Night Fairy, there were some kids who would go out at recess and pretend to be the characters. That's the greatest honor, to think that
That's
some, you know,
awesome.
that some of them wanted to be the squirrel. You know, I love that.
Oh, I must point out here that I'm convinced that Scuggle is actually based on me. I mean, with the ravenous apple
Really,
pie.
really.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you know, I would not disillusion you, Kevin. I would not dream of taking from you. There has also been, I mean, I think there's always tension with when there are two jobs and you want to do them both well.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I realized that I can't do much of the visiting author thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every now and then there's some group that, for whatever reason, I find it hard to say no, but
Well, you're sort of visiting author
that
a lot of the time.
you know, that thing of going to somebody else and you know, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Mhm.
So I can do writer and I can do park librarian, but doing the author visits and the speeches and the stuff like that, I say no to a huge amount.
Is that do you wish you could do that? I mean, is there a part of you that would like to do that?
Well, I am really vain.
No.
You know I'm really vain. You know I'm incredibly conceited. So every now and then, to go to a completely different place and tell stories to people who are not used to being told stories,
Yeah.
and you know, every now and then, you know, like if it's a really good day, I can take the roof off, and that's fun. But and because of the gold sticker, I mean, what authors charge for these visits is a lot, and if you have the gold sticker, you're sort of entitled to charge a lot. If I were, you know,
if I were 25 and had endless energy and could do
And
all
more
three
hours in the
things
day.
well,
Yeah.
you know, maybe it would be fun, but I don't have any regrets about it. I mean, to tell stories to Park School students, you don't get a better audience than that.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Okay, Josh?
Going off what you just said, I guess a question I would follow up with is,
Sure.
what does it feel like telling a story to Park School students? How do they react? Kind of how you,
So how are Park School students as an audience? What are they like?
Well, it's to begin with, there's the thing that I noticed when I came to do children's theater is they're kids that have been talking and reading and thinking and being exposed to literature from a very early age. So when I came to Park, I realized that the students I've been telling to 4th and 5th grade, the stories I've been telling to 4th and 5th grade when I worked in the public library, I could now tell to 2nd grade.
No kidding.
Yeah, oh yeah, because there's a degree of, there was an
Ability to pay
attention
attention.
span, you know, the vocabulary. So there's that. There's the fact that I don't have to start with kind of beginner stuff. I can do some really interesting stuff with these children. But there's also that quality of that children have to give themselves over entirely to a story, and you know, I can see their faces, and some of them just go very far away. And
Can you actually see eyes wide and, you know, chin
Yeah.
drop and that kind of stuff?
yeah,
That
I
must
mean,
be
some kids that
wonderful.
yeah, and that, and when I'm telling a story, you know, I might get to something beautiful or a monster or something, and I see their faces reflecting it, and it sometimes makes the hair on my arms stand up, because they got the story in a way that is so real to them that then I start to, well, feed off sounds so
Oh,
parasitic.
no, but I absolutely
but
know what you're talking
you know,
about.
it starts to come back to me, and
That's how it happens in
you know,
theater,
there's
right?
that, yeah, and there's that moment of you know, there are these turning points in stories which are revelations, and you see that reflected in their faces. And of course, with young children, there's also the quality of they didn't know it was going to happen. I mean, you know, sometimes young children, it's a tremendous relief that, you know, that the younger brother who is kind, you know, is the one who is going to
Oh, it's a
be
genuine
freed,
relief
you know,
or a
from the
genuine
dungeon.
shock.
Yeah, so there's both that quality of innocence in Park students, of being young, of being able to completely let the imagination soar, with a kind of sophistication that comes from the fact that, you know, they've had books and sophisticated verbal exchanges from very early age.
That's great. The one thing, it makes me think about Splendors and Blooms and people, I mean, you know, on the verge of sort of experiencing that. The only thing I would wish was, it's such an interior experience to read that. It would be so great to actually, I mean, all you can see is the effect afterwards when somebody comes up and says that was devastating or wonderful or powerful or whatever. But there's something so visceral about that interaction and storytelling, because you have instant sort of feedback, and then it creates this sort of loop.
Yeah.
But I mean, I wish we could film people.
Yeah, I would like to know what they said. I one time I was at a performance of one of my plays, The Emperor's Nightingale, and I was standing in line, and this little girl said to me, "You know, this is a pretty good play." I was charmed. And I said, "Oh, have you seen this play before?" She did not, of course, know I was the author. And she said, "Yeah." She said, they came to our school, and she said, I really wanted to see it again because it was good. And she said, "The only thing I don't like is there's this skeleton thing that comes out towards the end that is really scary." And I said, "Oh," well, if you've seen it before, now that you know that part's coming, maybe you can cover your eyes." And she said, "I wouldn't cover my eyes, that's the best part." That was one of the most, that was really, she taught me a lot about children and writing and scary things. So it'll be interesting to see how all the
That's fun.
scary things in Splendors and Glooms.
Yeah.
I wanted, you know, some splendors and some glooms and some of the real horror that I experienced when I first read Dickens.
Yeah, I think it's in there. I think it's in there. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your doing this.
Yeah, my voice is not good, sorry.
Oh, yeah, this is fine. Okay. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you.
Did you get what you needed? She's the best. Only a few know what's going on the inside. So, how have your parents responded to your immense success and fame?
Well, they keep all the books on the mantle.
Oh,
You know, they have all the books up on the mantelpiece.
that's nice.
When they move to Oakcrest, I don't know what they're going to do because I don't think they have a mantle.
Mm.
But they're all sitting there on display.
Do they, when a book comes out, do they just say, "Oh, we love that," or do they talk to you about what they? I mean, do you get more
Yeah.
specific feedback from them?
Yeah, they,
Mhm. That's nice.
yeah.
So, I'm thinking about the Night Fairy, and looking out that window, and I'm thinking to myself that the setting of, wondering about the setting of the Night Fairy.
Oh, absolutely, it's my backyard.
Yeah.
When I first came here, I took pictures of the backyard and I lost the photograph, but one of the photographs had this strange bright blot in midair. And people would say, "What was it?" And I'd say, "It's a fairy." And they'd say, "It's not a fairy." And I'd say, "Well, then what is it?" And I suppose the first, this was the first time since childhood that I had a little bit of land, so I really watched the garden, and I've had raccoons and possums and woodchucks, and one day there was a great blue heron standing on top of the fence. To see a 4-foot
Oh my
bird
God.
standing on, and of course, you're looking out the window, so what you're seeing is its legs, and they're just pure prehistoric legs.
And they're amazing looking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, bizarre. But yeah, of course, the night fairy.
So was that? I read that you said you talked about how Park School girls would come to you and sort of
Yeah.
make stories with fairies or whatever. So was
Yeah,
there?
Hildy Wolf.
Was it Hildy Wolf?
Well, there were a bunch of them, but how do you give an insipid fairy book to
Yes.
Hildy Wolf?
That's just wrong.
It is wrong. And
So
she's,
Flory was born.
yeah, somebody who, what they love is this idea of living in the wilderness, living in the wild, quite comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
And also wearing flower petal dresses. So you have all the adventures you want. You duel, you fly, you have magical powers. You get dirty, you climb the trees, you bathe in the streams, you dance in the moonlight.
Yeah. Well, all that happens.
Yeah.
So did in the sort of progression of your thinking about that, did you think story about a fairy and then I'll set it out back? I mean, how did the pieces of that come together?
Yeah, I thought I'll set it out back, and then I thought, well, why would a fairy live that close to human beings? With all our telephone wires and magnetic fields and
You needed a situation.
rubbish. And so, well, because maybe she couldn't get away, and why couldn't she get away? Well, what if her wings came off? But of course, I was in the middle of Splendors and Glooms when I wrote The Night Fairy.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah, it was the summer
It just
we
popped out?
We had to, I was stuck. I didn't know what I was doing, and it was the summer we were renovating the library, so I knew I'd end up moving the books. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll take a little time off Splendors and write something short that I can finish in the summer. So that was part of that.
Did you finish it in the summer? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. So, what was your first glimpse of Maud Flynn?
I was ready to go to sleep. I was thinking about orphan stories and how much I love them, and one of the things I loved when I was a child was that the orphan, would just end up taking over everybody's life, you know, and everybody would talk about how wonderful this child was, and, you know, Pollyanna or Anne Shirley, and everybody would, you know, originally there would be some who would be cold and distant, but they would end up in a driveling condition over this wonderful child.
It
And
always
so,
happened.
Yeah, so I thought, well, what if there was an orphan who wasn't, you know, a particularly sweet or winning child? I would write a different orphan story. But of course, Maud changes the life of everybody around her. I mean, she brings down the old ladies, and she changes Mrs. Lambert, and she certainly changes Muffet. So,
No, there's sort of conflagrations wherever she goes.
yeah, so actually I ended up writing the same orphan story that everybody writes. But I think when I thought of her as Maud, that was when she had a physical identity. And she was, you know, I could see this wiry person with this rather wispy dark hair, and I had a friend who had a kitten named Maud. And my great-grandmother, who was a hellion by all accounts, was named Maud.
Oh, there's a
Maudie.
Maud. There's a Maud
So-
in Sweet Masters and Good Ladies.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And she's a Spitfire. So it's a name for me that, you know, and Maud is sort of half hellion and half little black kitten, because what's more adorable than a little black kitten?
So is it? Did you have orphan story? I mean, one of the big questions is sort of where do things start? So you've done fabulous things, and everybody wants to know where do those things start. And you hear writers talk about it, and people say, well, you know, things start with plot, or I start with a question, or I start with a character, or I start with an image. Did this start with the idea of orphan story?
Yeah, and lots of times when I'm telling stories in the middle of the night, you know, I'm getting ready to go to sleep, and so I'm really just looking for a story to amuse me. I don't know that there's going to be one that's going to, I mean, and most of the time they don't go anywhere. They're not interesting. I had one a couple of weeks ago, which was really, you know, it was about this fisherman who was almost blind and sort of did everything by feel, because he'd been mending nets for years and he'd known the same cove, and it ended up with this, you know, mysterious woman and you know, who seemed to have drowned, and her skirts were like fishtail, and I don't know. That one was pretty interesting, but I never know what I'm going to get, you know, if it's going to be a story that has enough obsession in it to fuel me through the writing process. So
I'm going to ask you a dreadful question, which you should feel free to. Where do those? So you described. You said I never know what I'm going to get, and you described the fisherman's story, which sort of came. I mean, what's your sense of where they come from? I know it's a dreadful question.
It's not a dreadful question, but I think it's I think maybe I think you need to think that it comes from outside of you. I mean, afterwards you can go back and you can say, oh yes, this was.
Perhaps I can explain
you
it
know,
in this way.
this is connected to this happening in my childhood, or I mean, you can't get away from yourself. Eventually, you look back and you see that, you know, in this desire to create I think Alden calls it a denarcissized external excrement.
Is that what he said?
Yeah,
That
it's
is
one
so
of his poems.
good.
Yeah, and you think you're getting out of yourself, and then you realize you've come back to where you are. But I don't know anybody who writes who doesn't think that this stuff is outside. You know, it's that muse thing. It's, you know, that it's true. You don't get, you know, sometimes you just pull the same, you know, boring stuff out, and that's easy to recognize as yourself. But then every now and then there's something that's startling and.
Does that feel like a gift?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and mysterious. And that's when you've got hold of something. And I think people go nuts because they don't have any control. You know, and they don't, you know, where's the next idea coming from? You know, I just finished a big book, and I don't think I'm ever going to think of anything else again. And I remember saying that to you, and you saying, you know, yeah, I think from now on your artistic life is going to be pretty tame. And of course I bristled, you know, because
I was kidding.
Yeah, I know you were. You were playing me. You were playing me, and you're right, you know. Of course you were right, but there is another part of me that thinks, oh, you know, I'm not going to get anything else.
Yeah.
This is it. It's over.
So when you, there's a wonderful cover illustration of Maud.
Yeah.
How does that, so you had an image of Maud yourself as you wrote, presumably in your mind. I don't know whether you sketched or not. And now there's this sort of official image. What do you see when you see Maud now? Do the illustrations actually affect how you think about her, or does that feel completely separate from your own thing?
Actually, that illustration really does look to me like Maud.
It's really good.
She's a little prettier than I thought she was, but Candlewick sent me all these photographs of girls' portraits from the Smithsonian, and one of them had this amazing face, and she had incredible hair. She had all this wonderful ringlets and everything, and I said, well, if it weren't
I could
for
just
the
chop
hair,
that
it
off.
would be perfect. And
Yeah.
then, the artists worked with that alert. It was
Oh.
the face. It was this alert face. But Maud also reminds me of a little girl that I used to see in church. I used to watch this child in church, and she was an interesting little girl. She was much younger than Maud, but she would come to school and come to church in a summer party dress with a white turtleneck underneath because it was winter, and red cowboy boots. And she was always in motion. She had these black glasses, and you just looked at this child, and you knew that she was dressed the way she was because her parents had been forced to pick their battles. And I loved her. I mean, I just watched her.
Was she in your mind at all, even in the back as you wrote, or
a
is that?
little bit,
Yeah.
just a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was. She was part of it. I mean, stories don't have one beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some ways, I might have told you this, but when I was 4, I had a bad nightmare, and I woke up crying because there was a witch crying outside my window. There was a witch crying, and she was out in the boxwood bushes, and my parents were called in, and I was terribly upset. And I think at 4, a witch is a bad person, and it's okay if bad people cry, but I was very upset. And I think that was really the beginning of Splendors and Glooms.
Oh my God, is that Cassandra?
Yeah, I think that Splendors and Glooms harkens all the way back to a witch who is, for some reason, inconsolable.
And what does it mean that a bad person should
Yeah.
be crying in such a wrenching way?
Yeah,
That's so funny.
it's an odd thing.
It is.